So, fine. So, one thing, let's first what we want to do today is just to keep you with me is we want to understand that since I said that Nash equilibrium does not make sense in the sense that when you calculate Nash you have certain things going in your background. You are talking about somebody who is rational and all that, and for existence of rationality, rationality itself is a behavior, right. I have a consistent behavior and behavior itself can evolve. In fact, it is an interesting question how rationality evolved, that itself could be a question. Okay. And so, you can have a population of rational people and you suddenly say I have some mutants come up who are not very rational. Is the society now going to become all not rational and all that? Such questions can also be asked. But whatever, when you talk about rationality, you have to have in mind some sort of brain at work. You have your mind, and as I sort of argued in the last lecture, which is sort of very important, that you need to have soul in the sense of free will. If you do not have that, then these things are not going to make much sense, the soul in the technical sense. Now, if that is the thing, then if something is happening, some players are such that they do not have rationality, intelligence, etc. Intelligence at what? They can be intelligent in other ways, but not intelligent in being able to pick any decisions. That is not with them. Okay. Then really Nash equilibrium does not make sense, although you can write a matrix. Mathematically you can find anything you want, but it may not make sense. That is not to say that Nash equilibrium is not going to be important evolutionary games, as we are going to see. And I just remarked that these things were started by, I mean there are other precursors to it, but mostly you will hear the name of Maynard Smith and Price. There is a book by Maynard Smith you can read, it is a very easy read and sort of it is the I think first book on the subject. And as I was mentioning, it is very interesting. Yeah. Yes. So, this is the original one in 19, it is I think it is called Evolutionary Game Theory itself, 1982. So, this the book is only by Maynard Smith, not with the Price. The original papers in 70s were with Price and all that. But anyway, the interesting thing which I just was thinking, because everybody was trying to make connections with Nash and this evolution and all that, when sort of I was trying to. Okay. The interesting thing is when I sort of went through the book, I went to index and sort of I opened the PDF copy and typed Nash, I could not find a single mention of Nash, not even in the author list, bibliography, nowhere. Now, it could be a conscious decision to make your work look much more original than what it is might be, or it could just be that it is really not needed. You do not have to talk along that line. Okay. But whatever it is, I find it really interesting. So, now if we want to talk about living organism, this living word is of course problematic, and of course you will come up with definitions on that, and we can talk about it hours after hours. But if you are astrobiologist and you want to convince NASA to give you funding to find life, you better define what life is, otherwise you are not going to get money. So, the way astrobiologists would define life is very interesting, because they make Darwinian evolution an unmissable part of the definition of life. So, unless life form undergoes Darwinian evolution, it would not be called life by a certain section of astrobiologists, and that is how they sort of define it. Okay. So, it is interesting that right in the definition of life and living organism, evolution is inbuilt as per we are going to define life. Okay. So, living organism for us is going to be anything that undergoes Darwinian evolution. We will just touch upon what Darwinian evolution is, of course, all of you anyway know. And then the second thing which I have written in green, that of course I said rationality has to do with evolution, because evolution sort of will drive things, but how exactly? Okay. So, that is what we are going to focus today. So, anything you want to ask at this point? Okay. So, let us start. First, let us have a view of what are we going to say as evolution. Okay, there could be evolution in various ways. So, what we are after is essentially the Darwinian evolution, where you are saying first you have phenotypic variations and you have different phenotypes, that is to say, let us say a particular flower, species of flower of different colors, violet, red, something something. So, each of the things colors are going to be phenotype of that particular flower, and all those phenotypes need not have same rate of reproduction. So, you have differential reproduction, and then of course, the most important thing is these traits have to be heritable. So, when I say survival of the fittest, of course, I do not mean that if I can eat a lot and I grow biceps and I am going to then remain for eternity in this world because I can fight off anybody. It is survival of the fittest in the sense that it is my kids who are going to survive, it is my genes which are going to survive, right. So, the guys who have to survive are sort of the phenotype is surviving through the kids. So, what you need is essentially the heritability of trait, ability of the traits, and traits essentially is the phenotypes, the same word. If you have all this, then there is a chance that evolution can happen. Now, what do you mean by the evolution? So, if you have a rock with, let us say there is it's a eagle and you have some mouse sort of on the mountain, and the mountain is of white color and there are white colored mouse and dark color mouse. So, this eagle can, let us make it all dark here, it can actually see the dark color mouse on the backdrop of the mountain which is white, and of course, it is going to eat them up, but this may not be seen much because against the backdrop of white it is much more suited not to be seen by them. So, over time what is going to happen is that they are going to get killed off and it is going to reproduce and survive. So, you have then white taking up and maybe just some of the blacks remaining. So, what has happened here is you had, abstractly speaking, you have a population, the population has fraction, let us say x1 of white mouse, x2 of black mouse, and of course, x1 plus x2 has to be 1 because these are fractions. Over time, this fraction can change to white mouse being little bit and black mouse taking up most of the fraction. So, what has happened here is the frequency of white mouse and black mouse, they sort of changed over time, right. This is what we are going to call evolution. It is not going to be at this moment creation of new species. So, such kind of evolution has a technical name, it is called microevolution. And we are already seeing this is basically Darwinism at work, this is the natural selection. Now, people will sort of sometimes, if you are discussing with people who would like to discuss Darwin, Nehru, Gandhi, whomever, and at some point it becomes a fashion to just criticize those people. So, people will say Darwin is wrong. Now, in what sense Darwin was wrong? So, Darwin had not only given this theory of natural selection along with two other guys. In addition, the most important conundrum that was present there was that how the heritability of trait happens, how the trait goes from one generation to the next generation. DNA was not known, genes etc., forget about it. So, there had to be a theory for the trait to go from one generation to the other generation. There Darwin had a theory which had to be wrong anyway, because the knowledge of central dogma of life etc., was not anywhere there. So, this was sort of problem. Here if you talk about phenotypic variations, how is phenotypic variations going to come? So, one thing is mutation, And where does mutation appear? So ultimately we know that this heritability trait is what? Through central dogma of life, or molecular biology, or whatever you want to say. And what is it? That ultimately you have DNA, and the DNA encodes all the phenotypic expressions you have outside, and this DNA is replicated with the help of RNA, ribosome, etc., etc. And that's how sort of things go from one generation to the other generation, right? The sperm cell and the egg cell come, they merge, and then the DNA sort of replicates from there and keeps creating newer and newer cells. So we are not going to get into details of that, but all we want to know is that if you have a strand of long chromosome, which is DNA, then at any point of it, if there is a gene, which is basically, let us say, a small string of chromosome, it can correspond to a certain phenotypic expression, which essentially is due to some protein and all that. Now, this is a very simplified model, because we know that only 2% of diseases are monogenic, in the sense that single gene going to single expression, that a particular gene controlling my height or particular gene controlling my eye color, that is not how it happens. There will be tons of genes involved, and then your maths becomes complicated. And at the level of making toy models to understand how evolutionary game theory works is going to be very, very complicated. So we are not getting into it. We are focusing on only 2% of those diseases which are, let us say, monogenic, that a single gene is going to get expressed as a single sort of expression which you can see from outside. Okay. So in a way, that's sort of only 2%, but it sort of is easy to handle. But how does variation happen? Because now we know it's all about DNA, we know about errors in DNA and all that. So one way variation can happen is if this gene gets screwed up because of certain codons getting on and off or something, then or getting replaced, you get a mutation. So mutation can create variation. The other way variation can be created is by sexual reproduction, because you have two organisms coming with their traits, and then there will be recombination and all that, and new traits can appear, right? And the third one is migration. So here we talked about a mountain. It could have been that how did this white mouse even came here? It could have been due to mutation from one of the black mouse. It could have been, if this is sexual reproduction because of recombination or all, something happened, or it could be this just came from somewhere else. So that is also reason for phenotypic variation at a place. So these are sort of important things which are required for phenotypic variations. We are going to come to this latter. Right now we are going to assume we do not have any mutation going on, but whatever has happened, somehow we already have the variation present, like this setup. You can always keep this setup in the back of your mind when we discuss anything, at least for today's lectures.
There can be environmental variation also that drive.
Yes, but environmental variation, environmental variation is going to get imparted on the phenotype of the guy, right? That has to be through what? Possibly mutation. Right? My environment might be a cause for the mutation, I think. Yeah.
So migration would change the x1 plus x2 equal to 1.
No. So all I am saying is I start with it. I ask the question, what is the fraction of white, what is the fraction of black? That is going to be x1 plus x2 1. I am asking now a different question. How did this come in the first place? Okay. So it's a question before I set this up. So this is sort of what evolution is all about. Now the interesting thing is, and now there's a very interesting book, I forgot the name of the author and all that, but the book is called Evolution in 4 Dimensions. It's a beautiful read, and it basically discusses that there were many other ways evolution could have happened which were not given much thought earlier, at least during the time of 1930s and all those time when Watson, Crick, etc. were working. There was sort of political things as well going around. So essentially for us, evolution can have various ways of imparting itself. think about it, if I even forget and I go with the fact that Darwin is wrong, this part is still correct. Let's say I don't know about central dogma of life. I don't know how variations come. I take it for granted variations are there. So these things also I don't care about. But this is the thing which is driving microevolution. To get to microevolution, I actually don't need this. I need this to explain why these things happened. But if I take these as axioms, then these follow, that there is going to be microevolution. Okay? And if that is the case, evolution need not only be genetic, it can also be what is known as epigenetic, which is debatable in the sense that one has not seen effects of, as far as I have read, at least in some of the books, that experimentally it's not established if the epigenetic things are going to go across generations of 100,000 generations. Okay? It has been in lab studied up to 6-7 generations at best. Okay, I may be wrong, there might have been development in between. Then very interesting his thing is of course cultural, because culture can create all these things. I can have a particular religion, you can have a particular religion, right? Those are all phenotypes. And different religion can have different growth rate depending on what kind of government you have. And then of course religions are taught by one person to other person, they have heritability trait. So it could be cultural, and very internal to human beings is the language. Just because of language, you can actually have this kind of evolution being driven. So the good thing about evolutionary game theory is that although we are talking about evolution being motivated by Darwinian evolution, it can get applied to multiple systems where this is happening in some way or other. Okay. Think about how you are going to choose to go to which college. So there will be various colleges, and let us say some colleges are very strict at giving you grades, some colleges sort of give free grades, and you know it from your seniors and all that. So over time placements are good, let us say, so you sort of apply there. And then what other colleges do? They sort of find out, well, the college with very lenient grades and good placements is getting more and more students and more money. So that's a trait which is nice. So others will copy that trait. In a sense, this college has reproduced other colleges. And now the system has evolved to a set of colleges where anywhere you go, you get easy grades. That's also evolution. Okay. But you have to be a little bit careful there, because in those cases, the colleges had the choice of choosing the action. It was not hardwired in the colleges. Okay. So that is to say that the thing about Darwinian evolution can actually go back to sociology and economics as well. And you can actually talk about evolutionary dynamics even in the case where you have rationality, Nash equilibrium and all that. The only thing one has to keep in mind is the driving force is going to be something like this, and it is sort of an imitation behavior and all that. So actually economists did take up evolutionary games in their context later on. Maynard Smith is extremely critical of this. You can see a YouTube video, there is an interview of him. He is extremely critical, I mean this does not make sense. But what has now happened is the evolutionary game and evolutionary game dynamics has become a little generic word, where what you are talking about is simply this, that if you have such fractions of phenotypes, how the fraction is evolving over time, given there is some competition between these fractions. If that happens, you are saying some sort of evolutionary dynamics is happening. Okay. So what I want to sort of show you here is that ultimately evolution, although is Darwinian, it can be applied to various cases. Lastly, just to conclude this discussion, there are classes of models within evolutionary game and evolutionary game theory. This is populational model. I think Shitabro discussed lot of them in the SIR model and all that, maybe they can be called in some way. Populational, then comes evolutionary, then this is selection, and the last one is replicators. So, it is important to understand the difference. So, population model is you are saying I have fractions of certain types. Okay. So, I am going to use the word types, phenotypes, traits all synonymously, actions, strategy, they all mean the same, and sort of there is a change in the fraction. If that happens, I can call it a populational model. So, something is changing in the population. Although here I have to be a bit careful, technically what I am doing here is I have assumed an infinite population, right, because I am talking about fractions only and I am not letting the population to grow anymore. All you can say I am taking a finite population, but I am not letting the population grow as a whole. I am only talking about this fraction. Whatever, if just this x changes in anyhow, it could be called a populational model. But if x changes in a fashion that the change depends on previous values of x, so the evolution of x is dependent on x, it is a frequency dependent evolution, then this is evolutionary. If you basically go through these, then what is happening? You have selected certain phenotype, right? So, then you have selectional model. On top of all this, if you have the fact that the heritability itself is replicated, think about it, evolution keeps on happening not because my trait has been given to my kid, it is because not only my trait has given to kids, the mechanism which got the traits in the first place, or the creation of trait, that mechanism also went to the kids. So, the heritability has been secured by replication, right, the entire mechanism of DNA and all that. If that happens too, then what you have are replicators, and this is where sort of we are going to focus mostly. We are going to focus on a very specific case of evolutionary game dynamics. Yeah.
What is in the population spectrum?
Population is just you have x1, x2 and it changes, or let us say you have population, even if you let sort of population, all I am saying is in whichever way, if the fraction changes,
There is no directionality of change.
you can write whatever you want. If you want to go with the reality, you will put some models and all that directionality. You write whatever equation you write, doesn't matter. Okay. But as long as they are changing, you are saying something is changing in the population. Depending on your system, you just work with it. Okay. Evolution, it has to depend on frequency. Selection, something is being selected, but selection in very strong form is when even your heritability mechanism is going from one generation to another generation. So, you have secured the replication. Okay.
What's the difference between evolutionary model and selection?
In evolutionary model, I am not even talking about whether selection is going to happen. It is just evolving.
But it's frequency dependent. So
Yes. But you see, no, but I have not written down the functional form of evolution. You see, I am, let's say, a mathematician. I can write any function I want, and I can claim it's an evolutionary model.
how it depends on frequencies.
Precisely. Nothing is sort of there. And whether I'm going to keep the selection mechanism there, not there, that need not be there. If I keep it, then it becomes a subset of evolution. So, these are all sets and subsets. Okay.
So, equation wise, the difference is that in the selection, that inner circle payoff is involved. Is that the technical difference?
Yes, yes. Payoff will start becoming important. At least it will start becoming important right from evolutionary, because I will need frequency dependent things coming in. And in selection, I will have to write the function in such a way that I can see selection is happening. I have to put things term by term. So, this basically tells you what I was trying to say, that if I only talk about evolutionary dynamics, I can actually go beyond biology. If you think about it, biology is happening here, where you have replicators and all that. But if I am here, I can work with economics, psychology, or whatever. These are just names. And that's why evolutionary game theory word has become a bit diluted from the time when it was sort of invented. Okay. So, when Maynard Smith criticizes this, he basically is against using maybe these things in the context of economics, but these sort of work. So, you basically get out of the criticism by redefining what you mean by evolutionary, that is all. Okay. So, summary, evolutionary dynamics is going to be anything where you have frequency dependent evolution. Fine. So, now we will start getting into technicalities. Yes. If you have any question, please. And this was important for us to understand the very first step in this table, because I want to know what do I mean by living. And now you can see the living could also mean the college for us, right, because it undergoes evolution, and the way we have defined life is it has to undergo Darwinian evolution. So, now we come to the second of it, action. First, okay, what's there? Phenotype, we discussed a bit. Fitness is essentially number of kids measured in some fashion. The most important part is the third one, the last one. Other things will anyway fall in place. So, let us then ask, what do I mean by evolution and what evolution does? Okay. So, concept of Nash has no meaning, because I cannot talk about living being thinking and all that. So, what is it that is going to drive me towards something? What is the end goal of evolution in a way? So, the end goal of the evolution here would be something like, as per Darwin or anybody, is that I would like my genes to persist, but against whom do I have to fight? Any other genetic variation which might have come up. Now, again, I say gene, it need not be a genetic variation, it could be epigenetic variation, could be cultural variation, could be linguistic variation. It is just a word that I am using, you have to keep the generality in mind. So, I have to fight against whoever else is coming up there, and I have to win against that guy, right. So, this, and I am going to persist in the population if I win against the other genetic variation which has come up, which I am going to call mutant, and I am going to call myself resident. So, if there is a population of residents and a mutant pops up, is the mutant going to take over the population? Then I no longer have taken the right action. Now, I cannot take any action. What I am saying is I have not picked up the right phenotype, but I cannot pick a phenotype, it has been given to me. But I am talking in what Friedman calls in as if language, as if I am very conscious, as if I can pick up my traits and I can choose between them, right, but that is not actually what is happening. So, the question remains, let us say I have residents of all very coy birds, very docile, harmless, and there is food and all that, and I am going to eat the food, I am that bird, and I am going to grow. Ultimately, in economics terms, everything you boil down to money at the end of the day. Here, whatever you do, it ends up being calculated as number of kids you would have produced. When you write any game matrix, even in game theory, you might have heard of quantum games as well, I think one of the lectures was on them. If you have actions and you have players, when the interaction between players happen, there is something which happens which gives rise to the payoff. The path from interaction to payoff is a black box. We do not know what has happened in between. Tons of things have happened, right? What your brain was thinking, how your brain was thinking. If it was fight between two street dogs, I mean, they would have fought like anything. One could have gotten killed or something, then you got food, right. So, the mapping from interaction to the payoff is a black box. In quantum mechanics, quantum games, what is there? It is exactly classical game. The only thing which changes is the black box is now quantum mechanical. In evolutionary game, the black box is driven by evolution. Otherwise, the language remains the same. So, here what we are saying is, if there are coy birds, there is only one action in the population, and that action is going to produce some benefit for the coy bird, and that benefit, for convenience, we are only working with binary interaction. One coy bird at a time can only interact with one coy bird in a population, let us say. Okay. So, one coy bird against one coy bird, and you have some payoff coming up. Now, what is going to be the payoff? Ultimately, number of kids or growth rate, something which measures it. So, we put some number just for illustration's sake, let us say 3. But now suppose a mutant appears, and as the mutant appears, and mutant is a very aggressive bird. Now you have 3 more outcomes appearing. Earlier the only outcome was coy coy. Now you have coy aggressive, aggressive coy, and aggressive aggressive, which means now I have to complete the game matrix, and I have to ask, when coy fights against aggressive, how much kids that the coy get. Let us say, when it is against aggressive, it gets nothing. The aggressive against coy, let us say, get a lot. It takes most of what coy was trying to get, okay, not sort of sharing with the coy. And aggressive versus aggressive, let us say, because they fought also, say, so they lost some in healing themselves and all that energy, so produce less kids. So, some sort of matrix will come up. It depends on your backstory, right. But in reality, it is not the backstory which you are going to work with here, because you can actually go to lab, and it is a difficult experiment, but there are examples where you can actually calculate these fitness values. Okay. People have done it in viruses, bacteria, lizards, and all that. There is a very nice book, because this question I always keep on getting, Friedman and Sinervo. Recently it has come. If you just Google this evolutionary game or evolutionary game theory, something like that, it collects a lot of papers which discusses applications of evolutionary games in various animals and all that. So, if you want to see exact how this has been applied, whether how fitness calculated, etc., you can find many examples there. Okay. I am not going to get into this, would like to focus on the conceptual part, other things we can discuss. So, this is now the game matrix. But what has happened here is, mutants are always rare, right. Mutant does not just come up in bulk, some blip somewhere is mutation. So, mutation is going to happen at a very small rate. So, the fraction of aggressive birds which have come up in the population is going to be only of, let us say, epsilon size, where epsilon tends to 0. The rest of the birds are going to be coy. Note one very important thing here. Yeah, you have a question? No. So, note very important thing here, that we by construction are considering only symmetric games here, because I have a single population. If I pick an individual arbitrarily, it can be either coy or aggressive. So, every individual has same strategies, same payoff matrix. So, I am really not talking about any bimatrix games and all that. In fact, defining the concept of evolutionary stability and all that in bimatrix is very subtle. Okay. So, only symmetric games, and hence I am not writing the second payoff element. In fact, if I get asymmetric Nash and all that, I am going to ignore them, because they will make no sense. Anyway, so this is the setup. So, similarly, this is what you have. And now, what is the question you are going to ask? You are going to ask whether this is a good strategy to have. What does good mean in evolutionary sense? That it is stable against the mutant's aggression. Now, how to calculate what is good or bad? Number of kids. And how do you calculate that number of kids here? You basically say that on average, if a coy interacts with a coy, is going to interact with the probability 1 minus epsilon, and with the aggressive with probability epsilon. So, number of kids on average is going to be 1 minus epsilon times 3 plus 0 times epsilon, right. This is called expected fitness. So, expected fitness, because you have calculated the expected value of the fitness. So, that means if I am coy, I will get that amount of fitness. If I am aggressive, I am going to get 1 minus epsilon times 5 plus 1 epsilon. That is the expected fitness of the phenotype aggressive. And if coy has to win, or at least not let aggressors to take over coy, of course, the condition has to be that this has to be more than this, so that it reproduces more. That is all you need, right. So, let us check if that is the case. Is this the case? Is this more than this? Remember, epsilon tends to 0. So, the term with no epsilon present is going to be the dominating term. So, that is 3 and here it is 5. Of course, 3 cannot be greater than 5. So, definitely this is not greater than this, which means coy is not an evolutionarily stable strategy. So, you say coy is not an ESS, evolutionarily there is a somewhere whatever, I am going to call it ESS anyway, stable strategy.
So,
Yeah.
in this case, I'm not understanding how is the interaction leading to that.
Yes. So, interaction, as I said, so let us say two birds interact.
Yeah.
If they interact, they are going to fight, do something, I do not know the details, but they are going to do something. For fighting they need energy, for walking they need something, right. When they do all that, they end up having some food, and you have to subtract amount of energy spent on getting the food. Ultimately, what you have left to you after doing all that is going to be invested in keeping you survived and producing kids. So, that is the black box which is inside. Okay. That is actually a good question also, because the kind of fitness we are talking about can actually come from 3 different ways, or the selection which will come to it later. So, right now what we are assuming is we are only saying the longer a phenotype survives, the more the chances of getting more kids. Okay. It is called viability selection. I will come to that when we will discuss replicator. But is this clear? Because if this is not clear, then next 2, 3, 4 hours are just going to be mess. Is the logic clear? So, let us repeat the logic. Let us ask whether aggressive is the good strategy. So, what do? We start with, we had aggressors, the payoff they got is 5. Suddenly a mutant comes, which is coy. Mutant comes with probability epsilon, 1 minus epsilon, this is 1 minus epsilon, epsilon. The payoff is going to be, what is CA? CA is 0. AC was 3.
No.
There is something wrong. This was 1. This was 1. This is 5. This was 0 and this is 3. Right. So, now we ask the same question. How much aggressor would get? 1 times 1 minus epsilon plus 5 times epsilon, and how much coy is going to get? 0 times 1 minus epsilon plus 3 times epsilon. Of course, the dominant factor is going to be 1. So, definitely this is valid, which means being aggressive is an ESS.
In this matrix, if I start from the columns,
Yes.
if I look at coy, then it is 3 times 1 minus epsilon.
No, but you cannot do that simply because this payoff matrix has been written from the perspective of player by default. We can do it like this, but then we have to write the other payoff. Yeah.
So in this matrix, the dominant or the population is aggressive.
Okay, that's correct statement, but that's not how we are putting it. We are saying residents are all aggressors. The mutant came up as coy. Is the coy going to spread over the population? We say it won't because. Yes.
So, in this whole setting,
Yes.
so basically, when you calculate expected payoff and again still maximizing it, so you're so deep down the assumption is that the evolution is risk neutral, right? And that holds. Is that a correct statement? For example, I would have sometime thought that evolution could be risk averse, because
I mean, the way it is set up, you are right. I mean, we are actually not even talking about risk here. It's implicitly sort of assumed what you are saying.
but isn't it okay? Maybe
No, because that's, I don't think it's about right or wrong.
No, let me ask this question: that if there is some species which produces definitely 10 times compared to some other species which produces 11 kids, but with an expected value.
I understand. So you are basically getting into what is known as bet hedging and all that. So that has to be included in the payoff matrix itself. So those will now become strategy. Whether I have a strategy of indeterministically producing kids about an average and a variation, or I produce kid with the, so I have to take them as strategies and put it in action. The formalism will remain the same, but those risks thing will come in the strategies. And I would like to ask whether that risk thing sort of works. I mean, given this setup, that just does not enter at this point. Yeah. Is this clear? Because this is sort of the crucial cornerstone of evolutionary game theory. Now let's see a very interesting thing, which is, if I ask you what is the Nash, okay, I give you a matrix. It's like, नेताजी सुभाष चंद्र बोस, तुम मुझे खून दो मैं तुम्हें आजादी दूंगा, तुम मुझे मैट्रिक्स दो मैं तुम्हें Nash दूंगा, right? So I have given you a matrix and I ask you, tell me Nash. You don't have to think about anything. It's a formalist view. So what is Nash? Aggressive is the Nash. It is not surprising that formally it is the Nash which has ended up becoming ESS. Okay. So that's where the connection comes. Mathematically, Nash and ESS would be connected. I'm going to formalize it more. So the concept of Nash comes, but the backstory is totally different. In fact, time given we'll get into it, ESS is something which may not even exist in any given matrix. Nash is always going to exist. That's the beauty of Nash. Okay. So we have to be careful when we make the connections. I'll just write down the formal. There are one more condition, but you are right. When it's same and but when they are same, there is another condition which has to be seen and all that. So we'll give a definition of Nash, ESS properly, and then we'll see what it means it doesn't exist. Okay. So let's just formalize it. This was just an illustration. We formalize it in a, if you have any questions, please ask now. So we write down a general matrix. By the way, because this is just an introductory thing, I'm sticking with only 2x2 games. Everything can be generalized to higher game. You don't gain anything new conceptually. Hence, I'm not going. But we can go and make it more and more complicated. Okay. So these are general symbols for payoffs written here. This for reward, temptation, punishment, suckers, payoff, and all those. Usually you write the strategy as CD, cooperation, defection, and all that. Don't care, these are just now certain letters which have been put. Everything I am seeing from the perspective of player 1, and I want to ask if C is ESS. So what is it that we are doing? We are saying the resident was all C, resident were all C, mutation comes with epsilon. So this will be 1 minus epsilon, epsilon 1 minus epsilon. I want to see whether R times 1 minus epsilon plus S times epsilon is more than T times 1 minus epsilon plus P times epsilon. If this happens, then I would claim that C is ESS. What does this mean? Look at it. It basically means that if this has to hold, then this means that R has to be greater than T. because epsilon tends to 0.
Why are we claiming the greater than?
Because I want to figure out if C is ESS. I want to now find condition of ESS generally. So this has to happen as epsilon tends to 0. What is the second possibility? That R is equal to T, then your dominant term is gone, then the next term has to be sort of checked. So if R is equal to T, then we have to check whether S is greater than P. If this happens, then you have ESS. Right?
Then C is the ESS strategy.
Then C is the ESS strategy. Yeah. Maybe I'll just write it. If C is ESS strategy, if C is ESS, then this and then that. Okay. Let me write it a bit more formally. You see the strategies, if I call my matrix as U and the strategy as P, okay, strategy or action whatever, then essentially what is the C strategy? C strategy is nothing but 1 0, right? Because C strategy, if it occurs, so what I am saying is I am using the symbol of mixed strategy and I am saying I have two mixed strategies. So maybe I will make it sort of easier rather than getting into this. I am saying the C strategy can hence be written down only as P equal to 1 and D strategy can be written down as P equal to 0 in this notation of mixed strategy, right. U is a matrix. How do I get R for C? I could have written the matrix element U for CC as U for 1 1 and that would be calculated as 1 0 the matrix RSTP times 1 0 which gives me R, right. So in general what I am saying is if I write the symbol UPQ, then the matrix element is calculated as P dot UQ, okay, where this is now to be taken as vector and this is the matrix.
What is U here?
U is the matrix and let us say this. Are the notations clear? Any confusion I can repeat.
What did you do with that U of 1 1?
Okay. If this is the matrix and I call this matrix as U, I can write R symbolically as U 1 1, U 1 0, U 0 1 and U 0 0. Is everybody okay with this? I now want to show that how U 1 1 is being calculated, which is a trivial thing to do. I am doing it foreseeing something. So I am calculating U 1 1 here. So for U 1 1 I need the P which corresponds to 1 which is 1 0 and of course this is 1 0 and this is 0. If you multiply you get R. So that means if I have any two strategies P and Q in the mixed notation, they would be calculated like this.
Usually this is not a matrix element. UPQ is not the index.
UPQ. Sorry. Of course, this is no. That's the thing. If you have a P vector, you see what is P? P is a probability vector, right? It's a distribution over your actions. Okay. So if you were to write me, I thought you would know it, but let's say if I have strategies S1, S2, S3, S4, and I want to write down a mixed strategy, what do? I'll have to say P1, P2, P3, P4. I have to specify all the P's such that summation of all Pi is equal to 1. That's what I do. Now I'm saying this is the vector P. So, if I have a pure strategy, what that vector p is going to be? For a pure strategy, the vector could be 1 0 0 0, the vector could be 0 1 0 0, 2 3 more, right. So, it is that notation. Okay. Because I am working with 2 by 2 matrix, I do not have to specify all of them. If I specify only one scalar component of p vector, I am done. So, I am just specifying one scalar component of p vector. But when I have to do the matrix multiplication, of course, I need the vector itself. Otherwise, how do I work?
So Q is 1 minus P.
No, some arbitrary thing, some arbitrary vector. Yeah, that is the curse of notation. We are sort of enslaved by thinking P and Q of coin toss and all those things. Understand? I am saying you have two mixed strategies and you are asked what is the utility. This is how you have to calculate. That is what you have always been doing when you calculated these numbers. That is what this is showing. Yeah. No, it is just an arbitrary thing for the time being. I am using an arbitrary notation. I am saying if I have a strategy P, I have a matrix U, how to calculate a thing like this, and how this can be consistent with my notations that these should actually be U11, U10, U01, U00. Okay. There is no opponent, nothing here for the time being, it is a notation. Now, when I want to interpret this, I am saying okay, yes, you can talk about opponent and all, you can ask what is it when an opponent competes, his opponent gets. So, what is it that I am going to do? So, for that, of course, how will you get this? Given our notations, this will be 01 RSTP 01, because for D to be the strategy from the notation of mixed strategy, the vector has to be 01. All the probability will be concentrated on the pure strategy D. The support is only this, and this definitely gives you P, which is what it is. So, notation is consistent. I am going to use this notation a lot. So, if any confusion, please ask. Sorry, I thought, I mean, we knew this. Yes. Go ahead, go ahead.
When you say U P comma Q,
Huh.
what does that mean?
Yes. U P comma means exactly what this means in the special. What does U C C mean? When C competes with C, how much P of C gets? When C competes with C, how much P of C gets? Now you can ask the question. If it was not C, it was not D, it was a mixed strategy, something. We will come to that, what mixed strategy means in that sense. But mathematically, had there been an arbitrary mixed strategy, how will I calculate U for that? So, here comes a resident who has a mixed strategy P. There comes a mutant who has a mixed strategy Q. Then what the resident is going to get against mutant? You can ask that question. It should have a mathematical answer. This is the form, the way we are going to calculate this. Yes.
So U of C and C means C is competing with C.
Yes. Yes.
So U11 means
1 is the notation for C in the mixed strategy notation, because C in mixed strategy notation is nothing but 1 0 vector. Do you agree with that? Where 1 means how much probability is with C and 0 means how much probability is with D.
how much with aggressive, how much with
Yes, right. Because I am working with only two strategies, if I know how much probability is in C, I definitely know how much is in D just by subtracting. So, I do not have to specify both of them. I can only specify the scalar P and I am done. So, CC notationally can be written like this, and this thing I can carry over to here. I can generalize the definition for any PQ.
So
Yes.
P is the mixed strategy of
Anywhere, a player.
first participant.
Q is the second participant. I mean, you see, it's okay whether you put vector or not put vector, it doesn't matter at this point because we are working with 2 by 2. If I was working with 3 by 3 and all that, I have to be very careful whether to put vector, not put vector and all that. Yeah.
So when we start, we have the matrix for the pure study.
Yes.
And then when we write it in this one,
Hmm.
we get something that's a mixed study.
Yes.
So that won't be an element replacement.
No, so that's not what we are doing. So we use this to create this. We understood this by working with pure strategy. Now I'm saying I want to generalize the concept of ESS. And suppose the resident has a mixed strategy. Then how to generalize my concept? I have to come up with a mathematical formalism. To find out what is the payoff of a mixed strategied individual, I have to know how to calculate it. I am proposing this is the way to calculate it. Okay. This sort of boils down to the standard matrix for pure strategy. Now this I have to include there and figure out what I have to do with it. The crucial question is, what does mixed strategy even mean in evolutionary setting? We'll come to that. But I think let's discuss this maybe 2-3 minutes more if notation is still unclear.
So if you have a mixed strategy, these vectors P wouldn't be 1 zeros.
No, it will be something like P1, P2. But I can always call one as P, the other will automatically be 1 minus P. So I can only work with a scalar P. So my mixed strategies would be different kinds of mixed strategy. I can write U of 0.5, 0.5. This will mean there is a resident with a mixed strategy of 0.5C, 0.5D, fighting against another guy who has mixed strategy, okay, if I put it like 6, with a mixed strategy where 60% is C and 40% is D. Does that make sense? Where are you confused?
Then how? What would be the like that expansion?
This expansion?
Yeah.
Oh.
How would that look?
Okay, let's write one of them. So if I have 0.5, 0.6, let's say, is that okay with you?
Then it be sum of 1.
Yes, that's no.
Not necessarily.
No. This is of one player, this is of the other player. Right? So basically this should be expanded as 0.5, 0.5 in the vector notation. And this has to be expanded as 0.6, 0.4 in vector notation. I am writing one because the other one is sort of falling from. So how do I write this? This is 0.5 times RSTP times 0.6, 0.4. Whatever comes out, comes out.
I know that. Why did you write U10 there?
Because what is the mixed strategy notation for this action?
10.
1, 0, right? I can only work with the 1 because 0 will anyway follow as 1 minus 0, 1 minus 1. So hence I have written C as 1.
That I understood. The next.
Because there is also C, right?
No. U of 10.
Because D strategy, what is going to be its vector? 0, 1.
0, 1, yes.
So I am writing the first scalar component 0. 0, 1. So basically, to write it very nicely if you want, you are basically doing this. And you are saying, since I can write this as P, this is going to be 1 minus P. So effectively, I can equivalently write this for convenience as P only. That's all. But while doing calculations, I have to convert it into vector and then do the calculation. Right? Yeah, please sort of, let's clarify this and then break for T. If you have anything here, the notation is not clear.
And will we let it sink in while they're speaking?
No, I would rather let have it down with the head. There are 2 points of confusion. You first decide which kind of confusion you have. One is notational. Okay? Other one is very deep confusion. What does even mixed strategy mean in evolution? How can I have a phenotype which is mixed? How can I be black and white at the same time? That's a different, is that confusing you? No. So, you do not have a mixed strategy over your two confusion. You have a pure confusion which is notational. Okay. So, maybe what you do is, I ask you this question. Suppose a resident comes with a strategy 1/3, 2/3, and it meets with an opponent whose strategy is 1/4, 3/4. How much is this resident going to get against this mutant? How will you calculate this? This is the formula, and do not remember it like a formula, this is what it has to be.
So you calculate the U for each of the
U is given,
U is an operation.
U is given. Given that U, how can you calculate for any two arbitrary strategies the expected payoff, so to say, expected fitness? Okay. Okay, so the confusion is not sort of what's keeping the coffee. We can come back and continue. Think about this over the time, and if you can calculate this. Yes, okay, those of you can leave, want to leave can leave, others can stay around.